that your realm of influence starts to grow, but it grows in a positive way. Just like you can end up in hell one step at a time, and that's extraordinarily well documented. You can end up at the opposite place of that one step at a time, but it's also that same gradual process. You don't get to leap from being a 17-year-old knothead who doesn't know anything and who isn't disciplined to the critic of Judeo-Christian society. You just don't know enough to do that, especially when you can look at your own life and think about how many things that you're doing that you know are wrong, that you could fix, that you aren't fixing. And that's the crucial thing. This mode of thinking isn't asking people to stretch themselves beyond what they're capable of. It's just asking them to stretch themselves to the point that they are capable of and seeing what happens. And that works. It works. I've had many people write me over the last year, and this is a great thing, really, it's a great thing, who said that they started to tell the truth, or at least not to lie, because who can tell the truth, right? But at least you can not lie. And that they started to put things in order around them that they could put in order, and that, the positive things just started to happen like mad. And they're not nihilistic, and they've got a purpose in their life. And so, thank God for that. And it does work. So,
I was trying to think of how to stop the loop of my sacrifices have been rejected. And the way that you stop that loop is, instead of saying my sacrifices were rejected, so my hard work, my effort, my everything that I'm doing to try and move forward, it's not working. And if you want to go towards hell, you keep saying, well, it's not working, but it's because of everyone else. They're rejecting me. They're not accepting what I've done. Whereas if you say to yourself, oh, it didn't work, okay, it's my fault. What can I do better? And that's how you start moving in the other direction, which is...
Yeah, well, at least you have control. And, you don't even necessarily have to think it's your fault, although that's a reasonable way of looking at it. You could minimally just accept the fact that it's your responsibility. You're stuck with it, and you could actually change it. And once you know, too, that if you're failing repeatedly, then there's probably something wrong. It's possible that there's something wrong with the way that you're conceptualizing the world, because you have a choice, right? If you keep making sacrifices and they don't work, there's a binary choice. And one is, well, there's something wrong with the structure of reality. And the other is, there's something wrong with your approach. And so then you might say, well, let's take the first idea, there's something wrong with the structure of reality. It's like, you're really going to say that, are you? You're really going to come out and say, I know enough to judge the nature of being. And then the alternative is also quite frightening, because then, it's you that's making the mistakes, and you might be wrong at a really deep level, and that might mean that a lot of you has to burn off and be transformed. Maybe even things about yourself that you think are admirable and that you like, because your position, your self-conceptualization is so warped and wrong. And that's really daunting. But, when people set themselves up as the judge of being, I've written about this a fair bit in my new book, which is called 12 Rules for Life. When people set themselves up as the judge of being, then they take on what can only be described as a kind of satanic arrogance, because they've actually taken to themselves the moral right to criticize the structure of existence itself. It's like, you better be careful when you do something like that, because you're setting yourself up as the judge of being. And the Columbine kids did that. Like, if you read what they wrote, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what they say, is that, I've taken onto myself the task of the judge of being and found it wanting. And so I'm going to cause as much mayhem as I possibly can before I depart. And that's a very common story among people who do that sort of thing. It's so interesting, because every time something like that happens, people go, well, we don't understand. It's like, no, you won't understand, because they write about what they're doing. They tell you why they're doing it. But it cuts too close to the bone for people. And so they think, well, we don't understand how that can happen. Like there was a while back, I think it was in Connecticut, where there was a bunch of elementary school kids shot, right? Because this is kind of a one-upmanship game. And it's bad enough to shoot high school kids, but it's even worse to shoot kindergarten and elementary kids, because they're even clearly more innocent. It's like, well, that's part of that vengeful spirit, Better to punish the innocent than the guilty if you're trying to make a statement about your hatred for the structure of reality. And these things, you have to understand these things really you have to understand them at a religious level of analysis, because there's no, well, that's what happens when you encounter evil, is that you're into the domain that can only be described by religious ideation. And I don't say that lightly.